Cheers, everyone. Sleepy Reader here. I really have gotten rusty. This is now the fifth beginning. I've started this video and stopped about 40 seconds in each time, feeling lost. It hasn't been that long since I've done a video, but it has been a long time since I've done a comic book thoughts video, which is what this is. I have a stack of comic books that I have just piled up things after I read them, saying, "Hey, maybe I'll get a chance to say a few words about them to my online friends." So let me try, rusty as I am. There's Royal City by Jeff Lemire, a really thick, juicy chunk of comics, written and drawn by Lemire. I would say this is in a, what's the right word? A looser, more open drawing, even though it's the exact same style, but a looser, more drawing approach. A looser, more open drawing approach. I don't even know what I'm saying. Than, say, when he drew Trillium. Is that the last book he drew himself? There might have been others. But there's lots of good stuff in here. I really like the coloring a lot. I assume he did the coloring too. His watercolor, yep. I assume it's watercolors, not digital colors over his own line drawings. And I think, at this point I know what to expect from Jeff Lemire art, and so there's not that adjustment period when I first encountered his art that, it took a while to get used to it. And I really appreciated it being this thick chunk. I don't know how frequently he can get this out. He's also writing a lot of other comics. It's kind of amazing the output that he has been doing. I mean, everyone made a big deal over Charles Soule at one point, but I think Jeff Lemire is now getting close to the output of Charles Soule, and Charles Soule's output may have lessened, or I've lost track of how much output he's gotten. So yeah, I enjoyed this a lot. There's a really cool page. And it's like a small family story, but it seemed to, how to put this right, it seemed familiar. It seemed to take cliches, or not cliches, but familiar situations from literary novels and from what you might call indie movies, the small indie movies about family get-togethers and family relationships. It feels like, maybe particularly back in the 80s, I read or heard about a lot of literary novels that involved, people coming back to their old hometown, which is some old industrial city that's now, past its prime. And that's what Royal City is, and kind of the present meets the past of the family and all the family's troubles. So it feels like that. This is in kind of a tradition of a kind of, I want to say, working class American novel in a way. I don't know if that's the right term for a literary novel. Anyway, it feels like it has a bit of that. Oh, you can see paint on my finger. I've been painting a lot of rooms in our old house before we put it up for sale. One of the things that's been keeping me busy. Anyway, I'm losing train of thought. So, but a slight twist on that is this kind of almost magical realism. Maybe it will turn out to be like magical realism, or maybe it's just psychological, or maybe it's something else. I don't know. Element, which is of this character, this boy or man. He appears as a man, a boy, a little kid, to different characters in the book. I believe he's a brother or son to some of the characters who died a while back or disappeared. And they all see him, and he seems to be perhaps tied into the I think it was a stroke that the father has. So to me, that was one of the most interesting elements. I definitely liked that a lot. And that's part of what will have me coming back. So, yeah, he is a brother who died. So in a way, this is, as your family ages, you face mortality. And I feel like this is maybe in many ways going to be a book about death and mortality. I heard Jeff Lemire say, I'm a much different person now than when I wrote Essex County, which I haven't read Essex County, by the way, because now I'm 40. And I know when people turn 40, they think they're really old. Now, since I'm 55 going on 56, I no longer think of 40 as that old. But I can see that he's thinking more about his mortality. Another kind of sort of cliche or standard trope of these kinds of literary novels or even in movies, it's often the case that the main character coming back to his old town or visiting his family is a now somewhat successful writer, perhaps struggling with writer's block, and we get that in there. I guess because of that, I think of him as the stand-in for Jeff Lemire, although it's funny having him talk about writer's block when it seems like there's 8 or 9 comic books a month coming out with his name on it. But anyway, maybe he's experienced writer's block somewhere, but it's kind of, that element felt like kind of a cliche, and it always seems a little bit of an easy move for writers and filmmakers to make the main character the creative person who comes back to their working class roots for a visit. But I'm not really saying that. I'm just saying that as an observation or something I experience when I'm reading this without making me dislike it. I definitely am putting it on my pull list, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. I do still think of the fact that I loved the last book he drew on its own, Trillium, a lot for the first few issues, and then it went horribly south for me. But hopefully this book being more grounded in real life, less likely to have that problem. I mentioned on Twitter that it reminded me in some weird way of Tom King's maxi series, The Vision. And I think because although that was not with the working class industrial city roots, it was about, even though it had so many fantastical elements, it was kind of a meditation on regular life and family life and stuff, but with that patina of weirdness over it. And this too has that kind of dreamlike quality while examining the mundane. So it's somehow, the two remind me of each other. And maybe also Tom King's The Vision borrowed a lot of cliches from literary novel, or not cliches, but I mean moves, ways of telling stories from literary novels and indie movies or movies that are about family and take kind of a serious literary tone in their movie making. So that's why I made the connection to that, even though obviously it's a very different product. It's even much more personal and does not involve superheroes. Let's see. Reborn was a lot of fun. I feel like there's a lot of comics out like this in one way or another. The fantasy world that has somehow in one way or another touches on the world of real life. In this case, seemingly the afterlife and the people you knew in life are part of the fantasy world that you're the hero of. I'm still waiting for there's only one more issue to happen. I think it'll be the typical Mark Millar final issue that is double sized, so it's kind of like there's 2 issues left, or one really long climax. There was really cool stuff in here. There's really cool bits of writing. There's a reveal at the end that I thought was a bit too easy. So I'm hoping that that's still a feint that is hiding some other secret or reveal about this world. The more we get into it and the more this girl acts like the hero, the more it seems very fictional that she just happens to be the hero of this universe. The person who can save the whole of Afterlife, this one person, why her? There's really absolutely no reason. Just that it's from her point of view. So can this all in the end be revealed as her fantasy while she's dying, or what? I'm not sure. There's questions about her husband. There's a kind of a weird thing where they find her husband's village, but it's too late. Her husband's been kidnapped by the bad guys, and she meets, I guess her husband's been dead for 7 years or longer before her, and so before she arrived, he acquired a new wife and had children. So the children look older than 7, really, height-wise. But anyway, if it's her fantasy world, that's an interesting touch. I don't know what to make of that. And then the reveal of the bad guy had, it made sense. It was, the seed was planted in issue 1, but it had no emotional impact or anything. And the reveal of the bad guy's plan brought us more into kind of standard bad guy territory, I guess. But still, I'm really enjoying this, and it should be said, great art and coloring that just really makes the art pop. I continue to kind of grow in my love of good coloring in some comics. By the way, I got this shirt before I knew this character was going to be central to a recent crossover comic. But anyway, I'll talk about that in another video. Not the shirt, but the comic. Another comic I'm enjoying a lot and is kind of in that vein, the real world crossed with the fantasy worlds, is Curse Words. And I think what elevates this for me, well, the art and the coloring are really awesome. Look at that. That's really nice. And there's nothing in the writing or plot that is that unusual in terms of a fantasy story, but it's told with a nice rhythm and a plumb, a nice feel for the fun of the story in a way. So it gives me an extra enjoyment of the fantasy story. And I'm a fan of fantasy stories. So, so it feels like the big surprise and twist of this comic book was in the first issue, just with the quirkiness of the wizard and his bad guy turning into a good guy sort of in that first issue. So it feels like there's more of the standard fantasy stuff is what's left for later issues. But maybe I could be wrong. There might be some further revelations about Syzygy, the evil overlord, and about the woman who used to be Wizard's lover and has now been assigned to kill him. But I forget her name at the moment. She's a fairly interesting character. But I think it's all in the telling more than in the uniqueness of the plot or the settings or anything like that. Kind of similar in that sense of it being in the telling and in the art is God Country. It does have a it's slightly familiar from like Elric and Stormbringer and stuff, but the idea of this magical sword that's kind of the god of swords, and so is the embodiment of all magical swords and of all time in all stories across the universe, is a lot of fun. And it at least hints at being part of another popular comic book genre right now, which is kind of the slightly redneck southern story. The redneckiness or the southernness of it, other than it being called God Country, isn't played up a whole lot so far. I don't know how redneck the family is. I guess they're out in the country in Texas, but still, it's a fun fantasy story with the nice twist also of the sword curing temporarily the father or the grandfather of his Alzheimer's, and that's cool. And it manages a cool little twist at the end of each chapter. So I enjoy getting it. If it keeps coming out on a regular basis, that'll be really cool. The art is kind of in that, what's his name? Suddenly I forgot. Murphy, Sean Murphy's vein. What I think of as the Sean Murphy style art. I mean, not that I know whether Sean Murphy is the originator of that kind of art. But what elevates the art a little more, I mean, it's very good to have Sean Murphy style art, is the coloring, which is by someone named Jason Wordie. And I keep noticing how much I like the coloring. What Wordie does, I guess it's easy to show on this final splash page. He uses color in a very free way. He understands that colors aren't blocks, that there's dots of other colors mixed in, and there's an interesting dusting of a lot of different colors, and yet that color work never gets in the way of the line art. So, and it's not like he used a variety of colors to do very plastic modeling or shading of the faces. Instead, there's just a variety of, I'm trying to find another good example, but a variety of colors kind of sprinkled in and stirred about. And I guess that's why he's not doing the line artist's job for him. He's adding a different layer, a different sort of set of textures and stuff on top of the line art, or acting with the line art rather than just recapitulating the line art, if that makes sense. So I'm going to have to look. I don't recall seeing Jason Wordie before, if that is how you pronounce his name, but I'll have to look around and see if I can see more of his coloring. And sudden edit. Another fantasy book that intersects a lot with the real world is American Gods, which is a novel by Neil Gaiman. It's being adapted by P. Craig Russell. He's doing the layouts too, and then the actual art is done by Scott Hampton. And wow, where to begin with this? Let me say I enjoyed this a lot, but with lots of criticisms of it anyway. And the criticisms really start with, I never loved the novel American Gods. I read it, when did it come out? 12 years ago, 15 years ago. A lot of people consider it kind of a modern classic of fantasy, but I just don't see it. I always felt like it didn't live up to its potential. Maybe I expected a certain kind of novel, and it didn't, and it was some other kind of novel, and maybe I'll be able to rethink it by reading this comic book. But I always felt like Gaiman didn't take his idea of American Gods and do very much with it. And instead, it was the old gods that he focused on more, which was already his comfort zone, let's say. And although he'd lived in America a long time, and he's married, had an American wife, and I think now he has a British wife, but I'm not sure where the rock star that he's married to is from. But before that, he had an American wife, and he moved to Minnesota, I believe, and lived there. But I remember when I read the novel, I didn't feel like he had interesting insights to America to give, so that he fell back more on the old mythologies more. He threw in a few little interesting American gods, but didn't do much with them. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I've remembered why I didn't, it's been a long time. So I found this kind of mesmerizing to read, but it was much more read than look at. So a lot of it you could just read this out loud to someone who doesn't see the pictures, and they wouldn't be missing anything. They would get the whole story. So P. Craig Russell, maybe that's how he likes to work. I know he's adapted a lot of other stuff, operas and Oscar Wilde stories, and I think some other things. But he seems to stick too closely to the novel. And so even though it's his layouts and Scott Hampton's art, the art, and both of those are good artists and everything in the past, the art just feels like a almost rote illustration. So it's like an illustrated novel. And I kind of enjoyed it as an illustrated novel, but I didn't think it was a brilliant work of comics. It's interesting to see how Shadow is portrayed, and I don't know. So it was interesting, and I enjoyed it, and also it felt like a nice dense read, which was a good thing. There's, I guess, maybe one of the coolest moments is right here, where he seems in his dream when he seems to be talking to some kind of buffalo man. So I don't know. It's a fun book. The illustration really takes off in the last 3 pages, which is one of the first of the vignettes about an American god. Or is she an American god, or is she a goddess from the past who now works in Vegas or somewhere? Does it say Vegas? Just says somewhere in America, Los Angeles. She's a high-priced call woman or prostitute who gives, wow, it's a pretty racy. I'm just going to flash it quickly on the screen. But anyway, this part is drawn by P. Craig Russell fully, pencils and inks. And it's really beautiful to look at. I think the coloring is different too. I think Scott Hampton did his own color, but the part somewhere in America, it's called, the part by P. Craig Russell is colored by a very good colorist who I haven't seen much of lately, Laverne Kindzierski. Anyway, I like that coloring much better. Maybe if someone else had colored Scott Hampton's work, that's actually one of the best colored pages, but a lot of it is just this kind of washed out looking stuff. It's fine, but it doesn't express much personality. So that adds to that distanced illustrative feel as opposed to a comic book that you plunge right into. Anyway, but besides the beautiful art and the kinky sex of this brief modern mythological section, it didn't seem that clever or nuanced or brilliant to me in any way, which reminded me of my problem with my vague memory of my problem with the novel American Gods. I think my favorite Gaiman novel is Coraline, and I also liked the sort of unofficial sequel to American Gods, which was about the sons of the African god, the spider god. What's his name? He's the trickster, Anansi. Anansi Boys. I liked Anansi Boys a lot more than American Gods also. Anyhow, still, despite me putting it down, like, I love this cover. I think I'm enjoying this more as a comic book, even though it's not like a perfect comic book, because it's more like an illustrated story than I did when I read it as a novel all those years ago. So I'm adding this to my pull list. Let's see, I'm pretty much running out of time. So I'm going to hopefully have time another day to make another comic book thoughts to get to more of the comic books in my pile. And this is an ever-growing pile. I recently bought a bunch of Claw the Unconquered comics, and so far I've only read issue 2. I have most of the short Claw run from the, I think, late 70s. Let's see, 1975. I'm missing issue number 1 and one of the other issues in the run. But I think I'm going to go ahead and read it. It's written by David Michelini, if that's how you pronounce his name, and the art is by Ernie Chan or Ernie Chua. I think he's credited as Ernie Chua here, who was I think he was one of those Philippine artists, and he was a long-time inker on Conan, and here he's doing the pencils and inks. He also did a lot of covers at DC. He was a very good cover artist. Somehow looks very much like when he inked John Buscema in Conan, but now it's his pencils and inks. It just doesn't quite get up to the level of dynamism and power that Buscema gave, but it was very close to the experience of reading Buscema Conan. So if you like the Buscema Conan, I would say hunt down these Claw the Unconquered. The story has a bit, it's a 70s story, and it has a very heavy on the action, and that feels a little repetitive, but it has an interesting, playful tone, a sardonic, dour, almost, what's the word I want? It has this dark view of humanity, and it kind of reminded me of Jack Vance and his Dying Earth stories. And there's an interesting subplot that Claw doesn't have any memories. So it kind of makes me want to get issue 1 to find out if we see any origin to Claw or what the story is with him having no memories and who he is. And hopefully before the series got canceled, they answered some questions. But anyway, it's intriguing, the mystery there. And another thing that it resembles that may have influenced Michelini, if not Jack Vance, is Fritz Leiber with his kind of rascally characters. So it looks like a Conan book, and it's certainly sword and sorcery, and it has a Conan-like character, but it also has a little some other flavor of its own, either drawn from those sources I'm talking about or just from Michelini's own personality and imagination. And I think he remained the writer on the entire run. I want to say it was 11 or 12 issues. I think Ernie Chan eventually left and someone else took over. I'm going to have to look. I can't remember. I wanted to say Keith Giffen, but I'm not sure if that's right at all. I'm looking forward, though, to reading more of the Ernie Chan issues, at least. It's good sword and sorcery. Speaking of which, kind of a modern version of the same idea is The Return of Headlopper. Beautiful colors, a really nice style of art, very, extremely different from what you'd find in a 70s comic, at least any kind of mainstream 70s comic. As many of us have described this before as being a cross between Conan and Adventure Time, and it still kind of has that feel. I don't have a whole lot new to add to it. The colors this time are by Jordi Belair, and I want to go, if I ever have time, to dig up the first run of Headlopper and compare the colors. Colors are very enjoyable here. I remember enjoying them a lot in the first book too, though. I don't know if, because she's kind of a star colorist, whether I paid even more attention to the colors. But she's quite a flexible colorist. She's doing different stuff here than you would see her do, say, in Batman, because I think she's the colorist in Batman right now. So anyway, just wanted to mention this, and I was really enjoying it, and it kind of fits in with talking about Claw the Unconquered. Yeah, I think I'm out of time. So I'll talk more about some of these others later. But when I do get chances to read comics, I'm really enjoying them. I enjoy this 70s comic. I enjoy some Silver Age comics that I'm reading with my daughter. And I'm enjoying modern comics. They're each very different flavors. But despite my absence from YouTube, comics do remain my favorite art form, my favorite form of entertainment. my favorite let's relax and talk about something non-stressful topic. So anyway, I'll talk to you all later. Bye-bye.